Hello and welcome to my bad idea. I thank you for coming because odds are you're not going to be happy with me by the very end, as I insult more or less everyone watching this video. Though that's not quite my intention. I want to make it clear before we begin with your regularly scheduled 40k video that I'm not here to make anyone feel bad about themselves. People are going to be mad at me for making generalizations, and that's fine because they are here in every video. I don't really worry about them because they travel angrily from place to place like a sentient fungus, and even that's being unfair to the fungus. However, I don't want to make any of you guys and girls feel bad about your chosen army after I tell you the way everyone else perceives you. I'm here to have some fun, and everyone can take solace in the fact that I own 40k armies too, so will at certain points be slandering myself. To quote the Demons of Slaanesh, I won't do anything to you that I wouldn't do to myself. Also, for the sake of clarity, I describe the person who chooses any one of these as their main army, their big favorite. And naturally, the further down these factions are on your list of preferences, the less you're going to have in common. I would hope that much was obvious, though I do hope to hit too close to home for most of you at least once. However, I waste time to add length to the video because everything about this was explained in the title. Yet, starting with Space Marines at the beginning of every video and the wider Imperium gets a little bit samey at times, so let me take a new approach and begin with the Xenos. Specifically, the Aeldari. Not much better than beginning with the Astartes, but you know, baby steps. If you're an Aeldari player, the odds are good you're a list jockey. That is to say, someone that enjoys making lists. You make lists of models you want to own. You make lists for armies you never intend to own. You might even be one of those godless souls who enjoys using Microsoft Excel. The reasoning behind this is that the Aeldari have many units who are more or less perfect for one role. Very much the sort of people who bring the right tool for the job, except their tool chest is one of those standing units on rolling casters. So the people that play the army tend to have a strong appreciation for synergy and tend to be the nerds of nerds. That being the case, in one form or another, Aeldari players tend to be the most insufferable. Like I said, I'm not trying to be insulting, it comes to me naturally, but it must be said that Aeldari players often make a bad first impression. Whether it's the annoying list of buffs on top of buffs, starting to get high on their own supply and playing up the snobby elf angle, or just being a little bit too into their lore, talking about the craft worlds, the spirit stones, the infinity circuits, the wraithbone, and really no, they're just so cool, you guys. There's no one way they do it, but Aeldari players tend to be a bit of a handful. And the last trait that tends to make up the typical Eldar player is that they are almost certainly a xenophile. Hey, no judgment here. Star Trek did it for the generation before me, Mass Effect did it for me, and I'm not culturally savvy enough to know what's raising the current crop of alien fuckers, but I do know that it's happening. So they come to 40k where they're told that no one gets along with anyone and they ask, yeah, but surely there must be some wiggle room.
Phrasing?
Then they learn that the Eldar are by no standard the biggest meanies around. Elves and humans do have, interlocking parts, and that's all the sales pitch they need. They want to play nice, maybe even a little too nice, and the Eldar provide that outlet. But not quite all Eldar. The Drukhari don't play nice with anyone, including each other. So what type of person adopts a group of sadistic, insatiable degenerates? Well, if you're a Drukhari player, the odds are good that you're into BDSM, are on the LGBTQ spectrum, and or have an affinity for horror movies. Now, how can I link these three groups together? because the one point of intersection between all of them is an affinity for the movie Hellraiser. an aesthetic which the Dark Eldar very much embrace. If you now or have ever looked like you could have worked at a Spencer's Gifts, this is where you ended up. Not every fan of the Drukhari is a fan of Hellraiser, but every fan of Hellraiser who likes 40k is into the Drukhari. I would play the Dr. Chandonard clip again because it's a really good summary of the Drukhari, the Emperor's Children, and anyone who works with She Who Thirsts, except that these players didn't hesitate. The other thing that brings these three groups together is a strong love for freedom. Not exactly rebels, but definitely people who wouldn't think twice about coloring outside the lines. The people that march to the beat of their own drummer. Outcasts, punks, delinquents, the devious, the devilish, and the free-spirited, but not in the peaceful way, all find a home in the dark city of Kamara. If the place had a few more neon billboards, it could be Night City's evil twin. Or slightly more evil twin. Where the only culture to be found is in living fast, dying young, and leaving a beautiful corpse. And dying is certain, as the Dark Eldar are famously held together by Scotch tape and hatred. But this doesn't bother players of the Drukhari, as getting killed easily is not what bothers them. The only thing they worry about is how easily they can kill others. It's a harsh and unforgiving life, but they don't mind just so long as everyone else has to play by the same rules. Hotline Miami, Ghost Runner, any game where the respawn time is measured in nanoseconds and every enemy can be killed with a sneeze. In universe, in gameplay, and even in putting their models together, it is life on the razor's edge. And for them, that's fine. Unfortunately, another group who struggles with scarcity is the Leagues of Votann. Being so new, there are really only two traits of the typical Votann player. The sort of person playing Votann currently is the kind of person who's been playing 40k for a while at this point, picking up the dwarves as their third-ish army. Because of course, with the Votann being so new, with limited models and lore, it's going to be difficult to sell them to anyone that's just joining the hobby. More appealing toward those of us who have gotten established in the grim darkness of the far future and are interested in this new development. These new players on the galactic stage. Naturally, this will change with time as the Votann become more established, more traits will filter in to replace this one, and someone else will become the interesting new army, but as ever, I can only work in the present. However, I said it was difficult to sell new people, not impossible, and novelty is not the only thing attracting folks to the Votann. The other massive selling point is their general motif. I won't mince words. If you owned a toy version of the space shuttle, you like the Votann. If you watched documentaries on the Apollo missions to the moon, you like the Votann. If you are possessed by a childlike excitement over the Mission to Mars product line from LEGO, you love the Votann. Much like the Aeldari players before them who looked for a way to play nice between humans and aliens, Votann players saw the phrase, "forget the power of science and technology," and asked, "Yeah, but there must be some wiggle room, right?" But the Votann aren't the only guys who have gone hard into sci-fi. The Necrons have found ways to bend space and time. And I mean, whoever would be interested in that, right? The first component of the Necron player is the casual. Not the filthy casual, just the casual. Someone who once upon a time went to their hobby store with a buddy, and when they came to the 40k section, saw a box of Necrons and thought, "Those guys look pretty cool." Or maybe in a more modern context, they were doom scrolling through YouTube, came upon any non-specific video about 40k, and when the most infamous undercut on the entire platform started talking about Necrons, that person said, "Those guys look pretty cool." Space Marines may be the gateway drug into deeper 40k, but super soldiers can get pretty tired after prolonged exposure. whereas robot skeletons with heavy Egyptian undercurrents are an evergreen concept. After that, Necron players tend to be a little more book-savvy than other 40k players. I mean that both in reading the official Black Library lineup and an affinity for the printed, or as is becoming ever more popular, recorded word. It's definitely because Necron books are all certified bangers, and there aren't that many of them. So a person can burn through the lot pretty effortlessly and begin exploring other avenues in the universe. Beyond that, with characters like Trazyn, Orkz, Xeris, and even Xandrak, the robot men from the distant past tend to be much more intelligent and bookish than other armies. Yes, even including the Thousand Sons and the Aeldari. I mean, there's a running point in The Infinite and the Divine where Trazyn and Orkz are sharing memories of being in a library just prior to biotransference, and it's impossible to tell which one is accurate because they could both belong in a library, as well as could most of their species, or at least the ones that could still read. In brief, this is where the lore junkies build their nests. And the final point of the trident of the Necron player is they tend to be a little more reserved than the rest of the community. Not boring, not humorless, but less the sorts to loudly proclaim their ideals. Less inclined to get into lengthy debates over whose army is the best and who will come out on top in the end, if anyone. Secretly because, like their in-universe counterparts, they have a silent but smug assurance that it's gonna be them. But they're not so inclined to shout their conquest to the heavens, unlike our next faction. Which is of course the Orkz. Now everyone likes the Orkz. You'd be hard pressed to find a single person that isn't a fan. But not everybody plays them. So what makes a person take the plunge into the green tide? Well, our very first physical trait is that if you are an Orc player, you have tattoos. That's not speculation, that's a fact you can take to the bank. Orc players like tattoos, be it a lot, a few, or just an appreciation for getting inked. And like most things with the greenies, there's no real reason for this. Orcs have tattoos, sure, but so does pretty much every other faction except for the Nids. So why do those of us with permanent drawings on our skin gravitate toward the Orcs? Well, it's the vibe, you know? Similar energy, kindred spirits, and I really don't think I need to explain how these two things fit together. But still, what is that vibe exactly? 1 point for riding a motorcycle, 1 point for being a man or woman of few words, 2 points for drinking like a fish, but minus points if it's anything that couldn't double as paint thinner. 2 points if you could find the way to your local gym blindfolded. And 3 points for just being a bit of an asshole, but in a fun way. All this comes together to form the kind of person that maybe doesn't want to live in the Mad Max universe, but would be interested in a vacation. And of course, the Orc mentality tends to bleed over into all other playstyles too. We're talking about someone who played 40k Darktide and asked, what's the point of the other 3 classes when Ogryn is right there? Someone who played Baldur's Gate 3 for the first time and asked, what's the point of any other classes besides Barbarian? The sort of individual who opens the armory of any shooter game and heads directly for the thing that most resembles a Gatling gun. Or failing that, an M240. And an affinity for big guns is shared by the next group of guys coming up. The blue fish cows of the 41st millennium, otherwise known as the Tau, are well known to be the ranged army of 40k, as well as the, shall we say, most Eastern-inspired. So besides the weebs, who are the players of the Tau Empire? First, we should discuss the obvious trait. The person who plays Tau is the person who was building plastic Gundams long before they even knew what 40k was. An individual who enters the hobby with years of model building and painting already under their belt. The sort of person who was already a well-known figure at their local hobby shop until one day their eye was caught by this interesting thing called a Tau Riptide, and it was all downhill from there. The only reason a Tau player would ever need to look up a painting tutorial is if they are under the age of 16. Which isn't an insult so much as a reminder of the fact that many younger 40k players do tend to enjoy themselves some giant robots. Many, not all. After that, the Tau Empire affiliate represents the overlap point on the Venn diagram between the Orkz and the Aeldari. Appreciating the Eldar's ability to play nice when it suits them, yeah, the elves don't have a complete monopoly on xenophiles, while also wanting the big gun fun of the Orkz. However, the Eldar were a bit too stuck up and elegant for their liking, and unlike the Orkz, these people actually wanted to hit something with their railgun the size of a teeter-totter. Mentalities from both races are present, and this is the unholy love child catering to those players who are too smart to be stupid and too stupid to be smart. Also bearing a connection to the Orkz is that owning a Tau army informs, or is informed by, other playstyles. For instance, a Tau player is never someone you will need to convince to play the role of a sniper. Odds are they were already thinking about sneaking and sightlines, being very direct about what they want to do. Not quite the same psychotic OCD and Excel obsession with order that the Eldar player has. These guys don't tend to do so well when considering the bigger picture, but a place for everything and everything in its place, so long as that place is a head and that thing is a bullet. Short and direct goals are fine, but long-term goals are where they tend to fall a bit short. Even worse if it happens to be a plan generations in the making. Which of course brings us to the stealers of genes. So, what kind of maniac would set themselves up with a death cult that wants to change everyone's genetic helix? In my pros and cons of every 40k army, I described the Genestealer cults as doing with genetics what the Mechanicus do with cybernetics. And the player of the Genestealer army shares a lot in common with the cyberpunk fan, though their genre of choice is more biopunk. Extra eyes, extra arms, the sort of individual who will regularly head to the Bioshock wiki to check out concept art of the splicers. A person for whom the term body horror does not apply. A person who can probably name every monster in Resident Evil by name. And a person who almost certainly went through a Sid from Toy Story phase in their childhood, but thankfully did not become a serial killer. However, these players do still enjoy a certain level of trickery over their opponent, even more so than anything Tzeentch has to offer. If the Tau player was the sniper, the Orc player was the tank, and the Eldar player was the mage, here we have the rogue. Someone with an acute appreciation for ambushes and traps. Someone who will only fight directly if they get to fire the first shots. If the Tau player has a good time setting up firing lines and shooting locations, the Genestealer player is one who enjoys stringing tripwires and planting landmines, making a suitably inhospitable environment for everyone until the time comes when their star gods arrive. Speaking of which, we can round out the Xenos armies with the beloved Tyranids. Who among us would like a chance to join the swarm? Solid bet that the Tyranid player is a pet person. Dogs, cats, birds, mice, lizards, it doesn't matter. This is someone with an affinity for animal husbandry, who has a real love for watching videos of animals living their day-to-day lives. Which bear is the deadliest? Which bird is the fastest? And why can elephants either be reverent monks or single-minded killing machines? They like reading the relatable emotions in animals at the zoo or around the house. Meaning they're more awed than scared when the Tyranid lictor comes around to murder everything in a 10-block radius, but inexplicably leaves them alone. With that sort of empathy in mind, the Tyranid player is someone who lives on and by their friends. Introverted or extroverted, big friend group or a little one, again, it doesn't matter. Whatever their reason, this is someone who has a strong sense of community. They may do certain things completely alone, but they have a need to return to that inner circle on a regular basis. Much like how the Tyranids need to link up to the hive mind via the bigger guys among them, or else they almost literally begin to fall apart. Perhaps this is a little bit too flattering compared to how I've been snarking around with the players of other factions. You can still be a scumbag, just means that you need to have your little group of other scumbags there with you. Finally, and I saved this one for last as it's the one I want to stick in your head, if you play Tyranids, chances are good you're a woman. I don't mean that as an insult. Weird as that might have sounded. Like I'm over here in the Sandlot. You play Warhammer like a girl! No, I mean like this is the army that attracts the female players. Like everything else, it's not a 100% certainty. There are most definitely guys that play the Nids and girls that don't play the Nids. But if I was going to guesstimate a pie chart with the spread of every female 40k player's army of choice, I'd devote a good 2/3 to the Tyranids. And for the record, I'd follow it with Chaos Astartes, Drukhari, and Necrons, in descending order but of roughly comparable values. And why is this? Maybe because women have a higher affinity for pets than men? Maybe. Could it be because Tyranids have a matriarchal society, so there's a link up there? Possible. But for my money, I'd say it's because the sort of woman who would enjoy tabletop gaming in the high gothic grim darkness of the far future is a certain type of woman. The type who would be into dragons, daggers, magic, maybe the occult or cosmic horror to a degree. Are you starting to get a mental image of the person I'm describing here? Well, the Tyranids have all of those elements in their faction. Chaos does too, to be fair, but they are limited by a largely humanoid or humanist look. Whereas the Nids hold an advantage with more outlandish designs that immediately draw the eye. But we've exhausted the Xenos races. Let's hop over to the Imperium of Man where we can begin with the Space Marines. Who would play the Space Marines? Besides, of course, everyone. Let's be honest with ourselves here, people. Everyone that plays 40k has owned Astartes models for some length of time. Also, to be clear, I'm not covering the first founding chapters as part of this video, because that could and indeed will be its own thing. Gotta spread out the content. Well, with the Marines being so large and so prevalent, we can divide their players into two subgroups. The hyper-casual and the hyper-professional. For the sake of this video, I'm only going to cover the casual players of Space Marines, because Pro 40k is an entirely different monster. It's like comparing the painting of dogs playing poker against Casino Royale. And from that very brief summary, you understand there's not really much to dissect. But the person who primarily owns Space Marines is someone who wants 40k to be part of their life, but does not want their life to be part of 40k, if you follow. This is not their main hobby. They have something else dominating all their money and free time, but they still have an appreciation for Warhammer in one form or another. So they pick up a combat patrol of Astartes to be part of the fun. But they will never play anything larger than a 1,000-point game, and even then, rarely. They don't want to devote a full day or days of their lives to this, because like I said, something else is already doing that. The other aspect of these players is someone who wants to keep the game as uncomplicated as possible. They don't want to get caught up in alternative modeling options, kit bashing, airbrushing, dry brushing, green stuff, none of that. Give me my guys and I'm good to go. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Black Library's contribution. It's someone who read Commander Dante, one of the Primarch books, or something from the Horus Heresy series. They thought one chapter looked or sounded cool, and they got sold. That's as true for loyalist Astartes as it is for traitors. Continuing on in this realm of keeping things simple, the Custodes players are very much in the same boat. They only have to buy 2 boxes and get half an army. They only have to paint 1 color, and that's gold. It's nice and clean for everyone. The differences occur between Custodes and Astartes players in 2 areas. First, they know a little bit more about 40k than the average man on the street just wandering into the hobby. That's obvious since you need to have a little bit more depth of knowledge in the universe to even know that the Custodes exist. In my experience, the order of learning 40k armies goes Space Marines, the Space Marines enemy of the edition, Chaos Space Marines, Demons, the Imperial Guard, and then it gets a bit jumbled from there. So these people have dove a bit deeper into the universe and enjoyed it, but because this is still a second or third hobby for them, they can't make the big commitment. The other difference is that Custodes players are possessed by an odd sort of doublethink that most people won't understand. They enjoy being the big guys, but also enjoy being the bystanders. They have a bit of an ego that makes them want to be the guys who are even tougher and cooler than the Space Marines, but at the same time are perfectly fine to let everyone else have most of the fun, while they're doing their own thing, mostly guarding the big skeleton. That sort of quiet man confidence where they know they could make big problems for other people, but they don't want to, at least right now. Touching on the last Astartes variant while I'm in this neck of the woods, Grey Knights. Who loves the Psyker Marines? Simply put, it's the sort of person with an appreciation for the artistic side of 40k. Because Grey Knights have some of the best imagery out there. Their helmets are a symbol all on their own. Plus, with their psychic nature, it's very easy to add glowing eyes and lightning. Like the Necrons before them, this is a faction with the benefit of a strong first impression, which understandably sells a lot of folks. The other side of the Grey Knights appreciator is someone who will own more than one army. The Grey Knights may hold a special place in their heart, but they're not the only ones in there. Part of this is the Grey Knights' abysmally weak range, encouraging players to branch out, sort of like the Drukhari. However, unlike the Dark Eldar, this runs a little deeper into their outlook. By their very nature as heavily armored spellcasters, playing up that whole paladin archetype, these are folks that don't really enjoy going deep into one concept or being pigeonholed. Min-maxing is not for them, and they like to keep their options open. Which is what led them to pick a faction that can claim to have strength, durability, and wisdom. Not that they're the only faction that can claim to have all 3. Which might as well lead us into the Imperial Agents. Yep, we've completely abandoned the alphabetical order now, and we're going off-road. But what kind of person would let themselves be taken in by GW's half or maybe even quarter-assed attempt at a new faction? I talk a lot of smack about the Imperial Agents and will continue to do so because they deserve it for being so damn bare bones, but they do have a certain appeal to them. Like the Votann, this is another faction that holds the most appeal to the careerist 40k fans. However, in this case, it comes mainly from the stories. People who have read books from Black Library that focus on the Imperium, but don't neatly attach to any one faction. Think Assassinorum Kingmaker, the Eisenhorn series, anything involving the Death Watch, or even the Rogue Trader game to an extent. Things that existed on the fringes of 40k for a long time, now finally given their own faction. But this is really only for people who are deep into the hobby, as no one new or even moderate will be taken in once they see how truly jumbled and jank this army is. What a fucking mess. But they do include members from the Adepta Sororitas. Not very many of them, but that's as good a transition as any. Who would want to choose the Sisterhood of Self-Destruction? Well, the largest character trait, the one I will say with complete confidence, is that a Sisters player is a shitposter of the highest order. Someone who would, or does, put more effort into their memes than into their final exams. A paragon, a moderator, or at least a well-respected member of r/Grimdank. Folks that want to bring their fantastic and garbage sense of humor into the 41st millennium. And it's not super clear why these two connect. Could be the sisters' over-the-top aesthetic that they find appealing, could be that they relate to the sisters' fetish for self-destruction, or it might be because those less pure-minded among us are attracted to an army of all ladies. I really couldn't tell you why, I can only tell you what I see, and these players are the wacky ones. Another type of honorary battle sister is a transfer student from the Salamanders. And I don't mean that they're both nice, I mean that they both really like burning things. Like the Genestealer kid went through a phase of unethical kit bashing their action figures, the Sisters player went through a phase where they really liked fire. They were fascinated with melting candles, learned how to make a campfire without matches, or maybe they just nearly burnt down their parents' house one time. Whatever form it took, they gazed deeply into the flames, and as they got older, that fire died down, but was never fully extinguished. Until they happened upon the sisters with their affinity for flamers, meltas, braziers, and everything that burns, and something was reignited within them. Also, as you may be starting to notice, while most of the Xenos players tended to have one role they really like to fulfill, be it tank, sniper, damage dealer, etc., honestly, you could loosely sync up every Xeno army in 40k with a class from Team Fortress 2, whereas our friends in the Imperium tend to be a bit more eclectic. And if you don't know what that word means, they have many favorite roles. Go for ones with a bit more overlap, or just like straight up multiclassing. Because it's like most RPGs, where the other races have inherent character perks, while the only benefit humans get is being better at a bit of everything, or learning everything. On the topic of humans, we haven't seen many thus far, since Astartes and Custodes can qualify as their own subspecies, but now let's remedy that by seeing a lot of humans. And I mean a lot of humans. An amount that would almost certainly earn the Orkz seal of approval. Naturally, we've started in the Imperial Guard. So, what kind of individual would want to stand at the head of an indescribably massive army of Homo sapiens? Well, the man, or woman, because I know women don't only love the bugs, whoever they are, the individual who chooses the Guard is one who loves military history a bit more than the average bear. Almost certainly not a proper historian, but someone who knows at least 3 wacky stories about World War II. The sort of person subscribing to Laserpig, Armonarchy history, potential history. You starting to pick up on the edutainment theme here? All that said, this can take one of many forms. Maybe it's an affinity for the triumphs of individual soldiers. Maybe it's the grand battles and sweeping deployments. Or if you're like the type of idiot recording this script, just like the movie Fury a little bit too much. Whatever it is, I'd place good odds on the fact that these people remember more about a war from before they were born than about the actual high school they attended. As an aside/midpoint, these tend to be the sort of people who got sidetracked heading to Trench Crusade, or Trench Crusade has sidetracked them from 40k. It's a chicken and the egg question with 40k's Imperial Guard versus any other tabletop game focusing on a world war. Which is a good transition, as which 40k guard subfaction looks like they belong in Trench Crusade? That's right, it's the Kriegers. Originally, I was going to write this part of the script specifying the people who got drawn in by the Guard's many unique subfactions. Always take a moment to shout out my friends in the Desert Raiders. But no, it really feels like it's just the Kriegers. And why shouldn't those people be interested? The Kriegers have a great aesthetic. I hate falling back on the army has good looks which draws in players archetype for a third time, but it really is true. However, whereas the Grey Knights and Necrons had a strong and powerful edge, the Kriegers just have edge. Very bleak, and they're okay with that. Sort of the whole point of adopting the Guard, and doubly so for the Kriegers. Entering the grim darkness of the far future and saying, "Alright, this is my life now, and I'm gonna own it." Which led them to the subfaction ripped straight from the cover of a Sabaton album. But not all humans are baseline, birthed, and boring. Some of them have flashy bits, shiny bits, hard bits, and pinchy bits. They are the servants of the Machine God, otherwise known as the Adeptus Mechanicus, who wants to pour their life savings into the little cyborgs. The Drukhari aren't the only avenue in 40k City for people making up the LGBT rainbow. The Mechanicus also tend to hold a certain appeal for them, along with the robotics nerds and anyone who enjoys piercings. What brings these three groups together? None of them have any reservations about modifying their bodies, in one form or another. The Mechanicus actively encourage replacing and augmenting what the God Emperor gave them. You want to change the way you look? Well, they're not going to bat an eye. Just assuming they still have eyes. The comfort to be found in a faction that is both non-binary and exceedingly binary at the same time. I think I was pretty balanced in describing that, yet I am positive I will catch a lot of flack for everything I just said. Well, anyway. The other component to the Servants of the Machine God is being massive goofballs, much like the Sororitas. Yes, as we get deeper, you're beginning to see much more overlap between the traits of various players. Remember, we're all united in one hobby, so it's fair that we'd have a couple things in common. It's like the Olympics symbol with the overlapping rings, only repeated a dozen times. However, the Mechanicus players tend to be a little bit more innocent in what kind of memes they post. Now, I'm not saying every Sisters player is a poster on R34, it's only most of them, but they just tend more towards the wonderful degeneracy side of the fun. Whereas the Mechanicus have their toasters, they have their beep boops, and that's really all they need. Not a lot of rampant, off-the-walls fun to be had in the faction whose third favorite pastime is lobotomizing people. Hey, I never said it was wholesome. It's the difference between the type of jokes you'd find in something like Fallout New Vegas' Old World Blues DLC versus the jokes you'd find in the Saints Row series. Not that Saints Row, Manuel. Come on, use the real one. There's a good editor. But we can end our trip through the Imperium with the Imperial Knights. Who digs giant robots? It should be pointed out before anything else that the person who buys Imperial Knights is the type of guy for whom the actual game part of 40k matters very, very little. Everything else comes before that. Learning about the lore? Great. Building the models? Great. Painting the models? Great. Actually playing the game? Not even once. They have their display pieces, and they're happy with their display pieces. These are the people who would buy those truly massive Lego sets. The destination is not nearly as important to them as the journey. They might play the game once in a while, but it's just with their friend group and rarely in a tournament. I have my mechs, and I like my mechs. Mechs, of course, being their massive point of overlap with the Tau. However, while the Tau player was brought up with a steady diet of Gundam and Armored Core, the Knights player was set up with a big bag of Pacific Rim. The folks that wanted their mechs to be chunky and powerful. Maybe not slow, but wanted to feel like they could demolish a building if they don't watch where they're walking. The Tau player wants to fly around or over the mountain with their jump jets. The Knights player wants to walk directly through it. And on the topic, what separates an Imperial Knight from a Chaos Knight, given their vast similarities? Honestly, not that much, given that the kit from either army could make units for the other. Pretty much just comes down to small details. Imperial players want to see themselves as heroic. Chaos players want to see themselves as inventive. Would you rather have honor and glory, or personality and freedom? Do you want to embrace your role as the villain and go hog wild with your military base on legs? Or do you want to stand proud against the hordes that threaten humanity, even if it's a doomed errand? It really all comes down to whose propaganda you enjoy more. Which is a fine way to bring us into the home stretch as we discuss Chaos, consisting of Demons and Heretic Astartes. We'll begin with the Demons and save Chaos Marines till last. Now, most demon groups are going to have one trait boiled down to their absolute core, which is fitting since most of them embody the excess, overgrown, wild side, gory element of one given emotion taken to its extreme. Not to say there isn't some overlap. If I had to give one unifying trait to Chaos Demons Undivided, it would be the overwhelming and acute appreciation for unyielding horror in any of its given forms. Also, because this picture got me thinking, I'm going to go through the rapid fire assignments. You ready? It goes Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, 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 Slaanesh, Slaanesh, Khorne, and Jigsaw could be either Slaanesh or Tzeentch. I could see arguments in both directions. First to be covered is always Khorne. If the Orc player knew the way to their local gymnasium by heart, the Khorne enthusiasts could find their way there while blackout drunk. In one form or another, this is the person who enjoys the great simplicity of muscles struggling to lift things, and the basic joy of beating something to death with a stick. Guns? I need to aim those, which is both difficult and boring. I prefer axe. And if I need range, I can simply choose to throw the axe. Second up, we head into Tzeentch, who is almost certainly the player who puts way too much effort into their interests, and even they know it. The neurotic, the devious, the people who have a bad habit of getting lost in their own head, and they tend to enjoy that. Tzeentch somehow manages to merge the warring houses of the obsessive-compulsive and the attention deficit under one roof. It doesn't matter if you have one project you put way too much effort into, or a dozen projects all running at the same time, the commonality is that none of them will ever get done. And the Changer of Ways likes that, so be in good company. Also, of course, there is that affinity for devious play that we saw with the Genestealers. Third, there's Nurgle, for the folks that like a bit of the "oh yeah, oh baby, I'm gonna come to get you, baby, moving real slow, but I got lots of fat, cause oh yeah." Yep, that's about the best way I can describe a Nurgle player. Tending to be very jovial and lively folks. But it is a sadistic glee since they're often laughing at your expense. Because, oh yeah, can't kill me, baby, I'm too fat, oh yeah. But the mood is infectious, which is very meta. Fourth, of course, is Slaanesh, for the people that like Drukhari but wanted to take their rebellious streak even further. Not so much coloring outside the lines as coloring, and oh yeah, there are some lines there too. Expression is at the very top of their priority list, and coordination is not even at the very bottom. Rebels without a cause, because causes are for those boring squares that make commitments. And finally, we reach the end with the Chaos Space Marines. And this is broadly the Chaos Space Marines. Like I said, we're not going to cover individual chapters because that will be its own separate thing. So, who wants to side with Abaddon? Typically, I'd define the Heretic Astartes enjoyer as someone whose interest in Space Marines has reached a terminal stage. They like the Astartes, but as their interest in the hobby deepened, it reached an incurable level. They wanted Marines, but wanted them to be a bit more inventive. I'm not really familiar with the term for this, but it's when villains hold more popularity than the heroes. Because the heroes have certain standards they need to meet, and it often can make them bland. Whereas the villains, who are less constrained, tend to have more going on. They are surprising, have more wild designs and personalities, and if they ever help anyone, it wasn't expected of them, so it hits harder. Beyond the personality, Chaos Marines tend to be a bit more pure than their loyalist cousins. Now, that may sound a bit odd. You see this guy with the spikes and the tentacles, doesn't look so pure. But let's take a chapter like the Imperial Fists. Proud, but largely don't care even a tiny bit for the ordinary human. So they're supposed to be good, but they tend to act a bit numb. Whereas when the Black Legion disregard the lives of their cultist allies, well, of course they do. They're the Black Legion. When heroes act cold-blooded towards their supposed friends, it creates distance. But when the villains act cold-blooded towards everyone, it makes sense. The Iron Hands behave like unfeeling machines toward the rest of the Imperium, and it feels bad. But when the Iron Warriors behave like annoyed cyborgs who actively fire on their own troops when they get even a little frustrated, well then it's just funny. Also in the vein of Chaos Space Marine players being in the advanced stages of Astartes syndrome, Chaos players on average tend to be older than the rest of the community. And that is it! The caricatures of every player of every army in Warhammer 40k. I hope in my own small way I have deeply offended you by calling you out before the masses. Or maybe you're equally offended because I didn't expose you before everyone here. If you're the player who really likes the Imperial Guard because of your vast interest in Polo, and doesn't that just so remind you of the Death Corps riders, well then, good for you. But as for me, this video is done. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to make good on my own archetype. So I'm off to find a blindfold and some vodka. Then we'll see how long it takes me to walk to my local gym. Walk, not drive. Wish me luck, everybody. And by impact site, I mean a baby with paper white skin and the completely black eyes of a shark. Now, the slaves could tell a baby savior when they saw one, bringing him in and sheltering him. With one slave taking a particular interest in raising the young Corax, which is where his story takes a first act twist.